Stay with me tonight." Her voice was barely a whisper. Red blood was already blooming across her pristine white coat. The night air was thick with the scent of burning oil and damp earth. He was just a night shift mechanic. He had just pulled her, moments ago, from the exploding wreckage of her luxury car outside the emergency room gate. "You need a doctor." His voice was rough, protective. "No, I need you to stay." It was only when the emergency floodlights swept over them that he saw it. The massive, flawless diamond bracelet, the unmistakable symbol of the Moretti Group, shimmered on her wrist. The very corporation that had employed him, ruined him, and discarded him 5 years ago. She gripped his hand tightly. Her touch was trembling, yet absolutely resolute. "Stay with me tonight. Please. I don't want to wake up alone again." The ambulance sirens screamed, but in Ethan's world, only her desperate eyes mattered now. Ethan Ward was 34. He was a composition of contradictions. Tall, his frame lean and hardened by years of physical labor, topped by dark brown hair often dusted with garage grime. His eyes, though, were the most telling feature. They held the deep, experienced weariness of a man who had seen injustice and had chosen peace over bitterness. His hands, the hands of a skilled mechanic, were calloused. They moved with a quiet, decisive competence. They were the hands of a man who built, and now rebuilt, his own life. He was a single father. His entire world revolved around his 8-year-old daughter, Lila. They lived in a cramped but beloved old apartment near the industrial docks of Genova. Their life was simple. It was clean. It was honest. 5 years prior, Ethan had been the rising star. He was the chief engineer at Moretti Engineering, a subsidiary of the vast international Moretti Group. He was brilliant. He was loyal. He was, until the day everything shattered, set for life. The day an experimental lab facility exploded. One person died. Ethan was made the scapegoat. Blamed for negligence and faulty protocols, he was stripped of his job, his reputation, and his professional license. He left the city a hollow man. He carried nothing but the clothes on his back and the one unwavering promise he had made to his young daughter. "Dad will never lie about kindness. We will always do the right thing." Ava Moretti was 29. She was the sole heir to the Moretti Group, a multi-billion-dollar empire built on high-tech manufacturing and ruthless expansion. Ava was beautiful, yes, but her beauty was overshadowed by her fierce, inherited intelligence. She was proud. She was a CEO in training. Her existence had been carefully orchestrated by her father, Massimo Moretti, the patriarch who ensured she was shielded from the messy, dark consequences of the family's wealth. Her life was defined by control, legacy, and a gnawing internal emptiness she rarely acknowledged. That night, Ava had abruptly left a high-profile philanthropic gala. Her polished composure had fractured when she received an anonymous message. A factory worker from one of her family's older plants had taken their own life. The reason cited was the sudden, unexplained loss of their pension and recent layoffs. The news hit her like a physical blow. She drove fast. She drove recklessly, consumed by a rare wave of moral panic. Her car, a bespoke electric sedan, failed violently on a narrow road leading to the hospital. The technical review, which would later be hushed up, revealed the root cause: a faulty, poorly manufactured component in the battery management system. A component manufactured by, ironically, Moretti Engineering. The car burst into flames upon impact with a roadside barrier. Ethan was on his shift. He was maintaining the antiquated elevator system in the public hospital annex. He heard the screech. He heard the explosion. Without hesitation, he sprinted out the gate, through the pouring rain, toward the burning shell of the vehicle. He didn't see the price tag. He only saw the silhouette of a body trapped inside. He reached her just as the flames began to lick the passenger seat, his mechanical hands, so practiced at dismantling and rebuilding, somehow managing to pry the twisted door open and haul her to safety. He laid her on the damp pavement, checking her pulse. She was fading in and out of consciousness. The chaotic, strobing lights of the approaching ambulance cut through the darkness. The red and blue flashes revealed her face, a face Ethan had only seen once before. 5 years ago, behind a polished mahogany desk, signing the termination papers that ruined him. Ava Moretti, the heiress, the signator, her eyes fluttered open. They were hazy with pain, but there was a flicker of recognition, a memory surfacing from a forgotten, despised past. Her lips moved, dry and trembling. You worked at Moretti, didn't you? She whispered. The fact that she remembered him even vaguely shocked Ethan. He nodded slowly. His voice was low, raspy from the smoke and the effort of the rescue. I did. I worked there. The recognition seemed to break something essential inside her. Ava started to cry. It wasn't the quiet, controlled weeping of a high society woman. It was a raw, primal sound. She reached out, grasping his hand, clinging to him like a person clinging to the last piece of driftwood in a vast, dark ocean. The pressure of her hand was surprisingly strong. She was reaching for salvation. He knew instinctively that this desperation had nothing to do with the car crash and everything to do with the moral crash she was experiencing. Then a small yet profound sound cut through the chaos. Ava's diamond-studded platinum ring, snapped clean in two during the impact, slipped from her hand. It rolled across the wet, slick tile of the hospital entrance, coming to rest precisely against the toe of Ethan's worn work boot. It was a sign. The symbol of her wealth, her status, and her past was broken at his feet, and he was the one who had to decide whether to pick up the pieces. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. The news was a firestorm the next morning. The headline screamed across every Italian and international paper. Night shift hero saves Moretti heiress from fiery wreck, and billionaire saved by the hands of the working class. Ethan Ward was, for the first time in 5 years, a public figure again. This time he was an angel, a hero. The narrative was intoxicating to the public. However, the internal whispers within the Moretti group were far more venomous. He's using this for leverage. The nerve. That man almost destroyed the Skyline division 5 years ago. Now he wants a payout. Just watch. He'll trade his heroism for a 7-figure settlement. Ethan, oblivious to the majority of the media frenzy, maintained a stoic silence. His only concern was keeping Lila protected. He navigated the sudden, intrusive lenses of the few local paparazzi, dropping his daughter off at her small, unassuming public school. He avoided every microphone. He ignored every phone call. He was determined not to let this moment of heroism become another trap built by the Moretti name. Meanwhile, Ava woke up in the executive suite of the hospital, a private wing her father had chartered instantly. The first thing she demanded was to see the man who saved me. Her father, Massimo Moretti, a man carved from polished granite in tailored suits, appeared instead. He was furious not about her injuries, but about the optics. You are not to associate with that man, Ava, Massimo stated, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He is low class. Worse, he's a liability. He's the one who destroyed the lab 5 years ago. He is a criminal in all but name. Ava's eyes, usually sharp and obedient, now held a new, fragile defiance. She gripped the clean white sheets beneath her fingernails. If you knew who truly destroyed that lab, Father, she whispered, her voice husky from smoke inhalation, you would keep silent. The hint was enough to unsettle the powerful man. He left quickly, but not before ensuring a dozen security guards were placed discreetly around her floor. In the afternoon, Ava defied them all. She slipped out using an emergency exit and took a taxi. She was dressed in simple, borrowed clothes, no makeup, no security detail. She needed to speak to him. She needed to understand the quiet moral courage she had glimpsed in his eyes. The taxi dropped her off outside the massive corrugated steel doors of Ethan's workplace, a chaotic, greasy, and brilliantly organized industrial repair garage. The smell of oil, metal, and honest labor hung heavy in the air. Ethan was beneath a massive commercial crane, his body half submerged in the chassis, welding a complex fracture. The sparks flew, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the garage light. Ava stood watching him, feeling hopelessly out of place. Her whole life had been spent in sterile, climate-controlled environments. He finally emerged, wiping his hands on a rag, his face streaked with soot. He looked tired. He looked real. I didn't come here to thank you. Avia finally managed, her voice oddly small in the cavernous garage. I came to ask why. Why me? Why did you still save me? He stopped his work. He looked at her, not at the billionaire heiress, but at the bruised woman standing on the grimy concrete floor. I didn't choose who to save, Ethan replied, his voice calm, steady, and utterly without artifice. I just saw a person who needed help. The moment of raw truth was instantly destroyed. A fleet of black luxury cars screeched to a halt outside. A massive group of reporters, photographers, and inevitably Massimo Moretti descended upon the garage like a swarm of hungry locusts. Massimo, ever the master manipulator, had orchestrated a public display. The rewarding of the hero. He approached Ethan with a sickeningly paternal smile, a thick, expensive envelope clearly visible in his hand. Ethan, Massimo boomed, that's valid enough for all the cameras to hear. I want to personally thank you. This generous reward is just a small token of our gratitude. The reporters surged forward, shoving microphones in Ethan's face. Mr. Ward, sir, how did it feel to have the owner of the Moretti Group cling to your hand, begging for you to stay? One shouted, the question dripping with implied intimacy and potential blackmail. Ethan ignored the envelope. He ignored the question. He looked directly into the highest definition camera lens, his gaze unwavering. I did not save her because she is a Moretti, Ethan stated, his voice slow and deliberate. I saved her because she is a person. The money and the name mean nothing here. The entire garage, including the reporters, fell into a stunned silence. Ava, who had been watching this public execution from the shadows, looked up. Tears, silent and genuine, welled in her eyes. For the first time, someone had separated her worth from her name. The retention spike moment came as Ethan turned to walk away, back toward the comfort and honesty of his work. Massimo Moretti, enraged by the public rejection of his money, lost his composure. You fool! You know she could buy the rest of your life, don't you? Massimo's voice was a desperate, high-pitched scream that echoed off the steel roof of the garage. Ethan paused. He did not turn back. He simply stood with his broad shoulders facing the chaos he refused to participate in. The past is for sale, Mr. Moretti, Ethan said, his voice carrying clearly over the fading noise of the crowd. The rest of my life is not for sale to anyone. That statement hung in the air, a devastating refusal of everything the Moretti name stood for. It was the freeze moment number one. The billionaire stood there, helpless, his power rejected by a man with soot on his face. Ava watched, her heart thumping not with corporate anxiety, but with pure, unadulterated awe. She suddenly understood what true integrity looked like. It looked like a mechanic turning his back on a fortune. Would you have stayed silent or spoken up? Share your thoughts below. A week later, Ava found herself standing awkwardly on the landing outside Ethan's apartment. The air smelled of old wood in the distant sea breeze. She held a thick manila envelope containing a full compensation package and a newly drafted contract. She knocked. Lila opened the door, her 8-year-old eyes wide and curious. Are you Auntie Ava? Dad said you're the lady who got caught in the fire, Lila chirped, completely unconcerned by the context. Ava managed a faint smile. Yes, I am. Your dad's a hero. Ethan stepped forward, wiping flour from his hands. He was baking with Lila. He saw the envelope. He knew the drill. I can't accept your money, Ava, he said before she could speak. It's not just money, Ethan, she pleaded, stepping inside the tiny, meticulously organized apartment. This is an offer to return as chief engineer. I believe you were wrongly accused 5 years ago. I want you back. I trust you. He shook his head, looking her straight in the eyes. Trust isn't needed, only the truth. You don't need to believe me. You need to see the facts. His challenge hung heavy in the air. Ava left the contract, but she took the challenge. She spent the next 3 days locked in her private corporate archives, ignoring her father's frantic calls. She focused on the old Skyline Lab explosion files. She cross-referenced the corrupted security logs with the company's internal server commit history. She used her inherited CEO-level access, the key her father had forgotten to revoke, to unearth the original data. Ava found the truth. The security file had been deliberately altered 5 minutes after the explosion occurred. The digital signature for the alteration belonged to an administrator-level account, Archive, her father's private administrative account. Massimo Moretti had covered up the faulty Moretti-manufactured component to protect the stock price and appease major shareholders. He needed a quick scapegoat. Ethan, the rising star who had recently criticized the component's quality, was the perfect target. Massimo hadn't caused the explosion, but he had erased the evidence that his company's faulty product was responsible and sacrificed an innocent man's career to protect the family name. Aviva stared at the screen, physically sickened. Her entire foundation of loyalty and family pride crumbled. She confronted him immediately. The emergency shareholder meeting was already in session. Massimo was confidently addressing the board, dismissing the Ethan Ward distraction as a minor PR setback. Ava walked into the room, her presence silencing the entire floor. She didn't speak to the board. She spoke only to her father. "You told me Ethan was a criminal. You told me he was reckless. You protected the stock at the expense of his name." She walked to the center of the mahogany table, her hands trembling. She took the stack of printouts, the evidence of the fraudulent data manipulation, and slammed them down on the polished surface. The paper scattered dramatically. "The Moretti Group does not need leaders who buy honor with money." Ava's voice broke the formal silence. "We need honor that cannot be purchased. Your signature is on these archives, Father. You buried the truth." The boardroom erupted. Massimo's face, usually the picture of cold composure, dissolved into a terrifying mask of panic and fury. Ethan was vindicated instantly. The scandal that followed was catastrophic for Massimo, leading to his forced resignation and a full public inquiry. Ethan's name was cleared, his engineering license restored, and the global public celebrated his quiet dignity. Ava, the corporate hero, personally delivered the public apology to Ethan at the docks. She offered him his old title, a position on the main board, and a blank check. Ethan gently refused. "I don't want to work for a family that allowed thousands of people to be silenced to save a stock price," he said, "even if it was your family." His rejection, not of her, but of her past, was painful. It was a rejection of the legacy that had trapped them both. Ava returned to the headquarters, but she didn't return to her office. She stood in the gleaming, silent glass hallway, overlooking the city she had just torn apart. She finally allowed herself to cry, completely and utterly alone. Her ambition, her loyalty, her entire life's purpose, it was all gone. She drove back to the small apartment near the docks that night. It was raining, a heavy, relentless downpour that mirrored the first night. She didn't knock. She waited by the door, soaked to the bone. When Ethan finally opened it, she was shaking. "I gave up everything," she whispered, her voice raw. "I tore down my entire world today. I have nowhere left to go." She reached out, the gesture heartbreakingly vulnerable, and repeated her plea. "Stay with me tonight." Ethan looked at her. His gaze was a complex mix of fear, compassion, and the exhaustion of fighting a decade-old battle. He still had to protect his heart and his daughter. "I have Lila, Ava," he replied gently. "She is 8. I can't." "Then bring her," Ava cut in, her eyes pleading. "Bring her. I just need to know that someone still believes I can be good. I just need to know I won't wake up alone in this new empty life." The depth of her isolation resonated with his own experience of ruin. The next morning, Ava made a global announcement. She publicly resigned from all positions at the Moretti Group, sold her entire 40% share of the company, and immediately created the Ward and Moretti Foundation. Its mission was to support the families of wrongfully laid-off workers and those damaged by corporate misconduct. The profits from her massive stock sale were the initial endowment. The papers captured the scene the next day, not of a corporate exit, but of a quiet, human beginning. Ava, Ethan, and little Lila huddled together under a single large umbrella. The rain in Genova was heavy, but they looked secure, a small, independent unit stepping forward into a chaotic world. The image went globally viral. It was dubbed the first real happy photo of the Moretti heiress. The narrative shifted from scandal to social justice, from corporate greed to human connection. Days later, Ethan gave Ava a gift. It was the broken half of her diamond platinum ring from the night of the crash. He had taken the broken diamond and had it welded onto a simple silver band. Beside it, he had used a jeweler's micro-etcher to carve two words: tonight, hope. 3 months later, the dust began to settle. The Moretti Group was in the slow, painful process of radical restructuring. Massimo was gone. Ava's former COO, a level-headed woman named Sophia, was steering the company towards ethical operation. Ethan, true to his word, had refused all formal positions. He had, however, accepted a contract as an independent technical safety consultant, ensuring the new management implemented the most robust, worker-friendly safety protocols possible. The new safety system, a masterpiece of engineering efficiency and accountability, was named the Lucerne Shield, a reference to the symbolic end of the reign. Ava was no longer seen on the covers of Forbes or Vogue. Her new life involved tireless work alongside the Foundation's aid groups. Her new uniform was not silk, but a simple branded polo shirt. She looked younger. She looked happier. Lila, who now spent weekends with Ava, had given her a new title too: Auntie Ava, the one who always smiles when it rains. The community redemption was total. The press wrote pieces celebrating the pair's trajectory. From corporate scandal to humanitarian icon, the story of the mechanic and the heiress. They were celebrated globally as an unlikely couple representing the potent harmony between class reconciliation and pure kindness. Their story had become a benchmark for corporate responsibility. The true test of their journey, however, came during the inaugural fundraising gala for the Ward and Moretti Foundation. It was held in a refurbished factory space, a deliberate choice over a lavish hotel ballroom. The atmosphere was electric with genuine goodwill. Ava walked onto the stage. She wore a simple white dress, chosen not for fashion, but for the symbolism of the coat she wore the night of the crash. She looked directly at the crowd of factory workers, engineers, and community members. "I used to believe money could buy anything," Ava began, her voice steady and clear. "I believed it could buy silence, status, and happiness. I believed it could buy reputation." She paused, her eyes seeking Ethan, who stood quietly at the back next to Lila. "Then a man who needed nothing from me saved my life," she continued. "A man who rejected a fortune to maintain his integrity taught me that everything my father had built was hollow. That night, I was saved from the fire. But the real salvation was realizing that I didn't want to be the person who paid the man who saved her." The entire room rose in a spontaneous, deafening ovation. Ethan only watched, a faint smile playing on his lips. He wasn't applauding the speech. He was applauding the woman she had become. After the ceremony and the quiet aftermath of the crowd's departure, Ava walked over to him. She gently took his rough, work-worn hand. She placed the etched silver band, the Tonight Hope bracelet, onto his wrist. It looked strangely beautiful against the oil and grime. "You don't ever have to wear it," she whispered, her eyes wet with emotion. "But I want you to have it. You'll never know how much you saved me that night." Ethan closed his hand around the gift. He looked down at the contrasting metal and his working man's skin. "It wasn't that night, Ava," he replied softly, his fingers brushing the new metal. "It was the second night, the moment you chose to face the truth, not the moment you asked me to stay. That's when the rescue truly began." The soft, amber lighting of the old factory hall cast a golden glow on their two hands. One hand wore a simple, rebuilt silver ring, a symbol of wealth transformed. The other was scarred, bearing the traces of engine oil, but both hands were clean, both were honest. They were two hands, finally aligned. 1 year passed. The Ward and Moretti Foundation had become a beacon of hope, funding everything from worker retraining programs to ethical engineering research grants. Geneva felt different now, a city healing from the corporate wounds of the past. The New Hope Hospital, a massive community health center built entirely with the foundation's funds, was finally completed. The dedication ceremony was held under a sky that, for once, was genuinely bright. Ava stood at the podium. She no longer had the brittle, intimidating composure of the CEO. Her presence was one of quiet, radiating strength. "The night I said, 'Stay with me tonight,' I thought I was begging for a moment of comfort," Ava shared with the assembled crowd. I thought I was asking a mechanic to save a rich girl's life. Now I know the truth. I was only asking for the chance to start living again. I was asking for the first honest conversation of my life. She stepped down from the podium. Ethan was waiting, standing beside Lila. He placed a steady hand on his daughter's shoulder. Lila, ever the child of symbolism, held up a new drawing. It was a bright, cheerful picture. A house, a garden, and a clear, brilliant blue sky. The title, written in careful letters, read, "The rain has stopped, Dad." Ava gently took the drawing. She looked from the paper to the actual sky, then back to Ethan. A slow, heartfelt smile crossed her face, and her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "No, sweetie," Ava said softly, correcting the child. "The rain never truly stops. It's always there, waiting. But we know how to walk under the rain now. We know how to face the storm together." Ethan looked at her. He saw the same fierce, intelligent woman who had challenged her father in the boardroom, but now tempered by the humility of genuine loss and the quiet joy of earned love. He was no longer the scorned engineer. She was no longer the empty heiress. They were simply Ethan and Ava. The three of them walked toward the hospital's main entrance, toward the massive arched portico. As they stepped under the glass roof, a sudden soft shower began to fall, pattering gently against the panes. The camera subtly focused on them, taking the final shot. They stood close, not touching, but perfectly connected. They exchanged a silent look, a decade of loss, humiliation, forgiveness, and renewal passing between them without a single word. The frame froze. The background faded. A simple line of text appeared, summarizing their entire journey. "Stay with me tonight, not because I'm broken, but because you make me whole." Below the text, the camera zoomed in on the silver bracelet on Ethan's wrist, flashing briefly under the glass roof light. The inscription was clear: "Tonight, hope." If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to Hidden Heart Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.